Um, Thank you for joining us. My name is Mike Sperlinger. I'm the chair of this discussion, the title of which is Distributed Futures, Alternative Circuits for Alternative Films. I'm a curator, I'm based in Oslo, and I have a background working in distribution of artist films. This event, if you've kind of wandered into this Zoom, you should know that it's the kind of culmination of a longer project called Mapping Distribution. That's a project that's a collaboration between Kunstnernes Hus in Oslo and On and For Production and Distribution, which is based primarily in Brussels, but which is a kind of European organization, a really important organization for fostering alternative production and distribution methods for, particularly for artists working on more ambitious feature film projects, but also working in many different ways. I'd really encourage you to check them out. They've collaborated, like I say, with Kunstnernes Hus on this project, which has been made possible by a very generous grant from the Creative Europe program of the European Union. So we should say a very warm thank you to them for making this possible. And what it's made possible is that over the last few weeks, if you haven't seen, there's been a series of very short kind of video interventions, or in some cases like video essays, by practitioners, several of whom we have here today, addressing the question of alternative forms of distribution from their own perspective. So you can see those videos via the Kunstnernes Hus website, and if you haven't had a chance, I would very much encourage you to look at them. And they'll kind of be our starting point in a way for the discussion today. I'm going to very briefly introduce the other members of the panel today. So we have Silja Espolin Johnson, who is the head of the Kunstnernes Hus Cinema and co-organizer of this whole project. We have Lene Berg, who is a filmmaker, artist, and also one of the co-founders of JAK, which is a new distribution organization in Norway, which we might touch on. She's also currently in Oslo. We have Anne Lajla Utsi, who is the managing director of the International Sámi Film Institute, and she's speaking to us from Kautokeino. We have Mariken Halle, who is a filmmaker, also a producer, and another co-founding member of JAK. And finally, we have Nicolas Siepen, who is an artist, a filmmaker, and a theoretician. He's based in Berlin, and he's, I think, speaking to us from somewhere close to Cologne today. So thank you to them for joining us. I should say we're not going to do elaborate presentations of them. You can see a biography for everybody on the website of Kunstnernes Hus. So you can read about what their kind of CVs and so on. But you'll also learn a lot about them if you watch. All of them except Silja have made a contribution to this video series, so you can find out more through that. And so we're really going to try and keep this very conversational, and it's not going to be a presentation format. It's going to hopefully be a conversational one. I want to just say something briefly. So I want to get past this as quickly as possible with a couple of kind of housekeeping things. So the title, like I say, is about alternative circuits for alternative films. We've deliberately kept that, in a sense, quite broad. So we're not, as it were, for example, addressing artists' films specifically, or visual artist films. We're interested, there are several different perspectives in this kind of virtual room today. And what we're interested in are alternative films in the broadest sense, and with kind of scare quotes around them. So the kinds of moving image practice or filmmaking practice which are kind of urgent and alive, and yet are not being well served by the current distribution landscape. And I guess that's why we're all in the room today. So we're deliberately working with a very broad definition. There is a kind of Norwegian focus, and Nicolas, always speaking to us from Germany, has a very strong connection to the Arctic Moving Image Festival up in Tromsø. But I think the questions that we're raising here definitely have a kind of international, certainly European relevance. I think maybe one thing to say is that inevitably, the reason we're sitting in this discussion is because something is not working, right? That we're having a conversation about the need for alternatives, the need for new thinking in this area. But I hope we're going to take a relatively utopian perspective. So I think especially in this moment, inevitably we're going to do a bit of complaining and pointing to the problems, but I think we want to keep a more utopian horizon about the possibilities. And I think that's maybe what the world needs at the moment. So I'll try to keep that tone. We've got about 60 minutes. I suspect we might go a little bit long. But we will try and leave some space at the end for questions from the audience if you have any. And I'll maybe give you a cue a little bit later in the conversation. And at that point, you could put questions into the Zoom chat, and I can then read them for the panelists. So I'll give you a heads up about that. If you've seen the videos already, you will know that, that our panelists have sort of addressed this question distribution from like very, very, very different perspectives. And I'm sort of aware that it's a topic that can be understood, even the word distribution can mean very different things. My suggestion is that we're going to try very loosely to address it through two kind of umbrella ideas. So to break distribution down into, on the one hand, the sense of audience and the idea that distribution means simply a relationship between a production and its public or its potential publics. And to really think in that pure sense of almost like a conversational sense, distribution as a kind of conversation. But I'm very aware also that distribution clearly has these much more kind of practical meaning as well, and is very tied to financial questions and certainly to the sustainability of artists and filmmakers' practices. And so in the sort of second half of the conversation, I'm going to try and move us into that terrain a bit and talk a bit more about some of those practicalities. We're not going to exhaust this topic. This is very much like a punctuation mark, this conversation, but let's see how far we can get. I thought in terms of starting with the question of audience and distribution as a relationship to an audience, I actually wanted to, maybe we can do a quick round, because I wanted to start actually, Mariken, with you. I thought in your video, which is kind of very, I would say like a very passionate kind of intervention into these questions. I thought one of the things that was so striking about it was that you talked about this idea of like filmmakers almost becoming exhausted by the word audience being thrown at them by, as it were, by marketers, like that it's a word that becomes almost like a curse word. It's like, you know, it's, and about the need as practitioners to reclaim the idea of an audience and to kind of radically rethink it. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that, because it was a very inspiring thought, and I just think it would be a great starting point for us.
Yes, I think most of us who are making films or being artists, we start because we have this really longing for the audience, and especially for me, it's been like that since I was a small child. So it's kind of a very important relationship that you have with you, and then I feel that in film school and everything, the audience is also a part of the education, because you show what you make all the time to your fellow students and your teachers and everything. But then something happens when you kind of enter the real film world, that suddenly a lot of people, you apply for money and they can say to you that the audience will not have this, so they won't understand it, or they won't buy tickets, or you get all these things told to you, and in a way I feel that they're not necessarily true, but when it comes to, especially like in the more film business part of the art field where I try to make films, people get very scared when there are money involved, so you get these silly ideas about the audience. But the nice thing, I think, is that I've had a lot of experiences where I've made something and then managed to make it, and then not finding a distributor that wants to be a part of it, but doing it myself, like going around with the posters to different cinemas and cinematheques and everything. And you feel that, okay, but there are people on the other end of this that are really engaged. So it's kind of just this misunderstanding in the middle. And that is also why we think YAC is so necessary, to kind of build a bridge between the people that are eager to get artistic work out and the filmmakers. So,
right.
so you don't get stuck.
Thank you. And we should come back to YAC or Jack later on as well. And I think what's helpful about the way you frame it there, I think, is that, yeah, like you say, that in a sense, audience in some context just means market, right? It's a kind of, it's a synonym for market. But I think we're all interested in something in a different sense of audience. Maybe I could move on to Anne Lajla and make that connection, because I thought what was interesting about your contribution, you know, and thinking about the role of the International Sámi Film Institute, was that you seem to start from a perspective almost less thinking about audience than thinking about communities, right? That it's like that it's so, and thinking about the different communities that you serve, whether it's the kind of Nordic Sámi community, but also the the kind of potential relationship to Indigenous groups in Canada and so on. Could you just say more about that, about the institute, you and the institute's relationship to the idea of an audience?
Yeah, that's always interesting, especially from a indigenous perspective and from a minority perspective, because you always have many audiences. You have your own audience. For us, it's the Sami language audience, of course, obviously, and then it's the Nordic audience, and then we have a very extensive network with other indigenous film communities, especially in Canada, in Greenland, in Russia, in Yakutia, all over, especially in the Arctic perspective. So it's always both from a filmmaker's point of view, who are you telling the story to? So you always have to think that you have maybe many narratives in your story that should communicate both to your own people in your own language, and then also cross the borders to both language borders and cultural borders and the universal stories. So yeah, and what we have been doing with Sámi Film, which is our own distribution, is that we have for now it's open in the Nordic countries, and then we are now expanding and opening it up to Greenland and to Canada. So hopefully during this year this is possible. So yeah, it's but it's interesting, and we've been also trying to build, because if you think about the bigger, like the huge distribution companies, Netflix, HBO, and all these giants, they are really about well, not paying that much to the filmmakers and to the right holders. So this is something we are doing when it comes to Sámi Film, is that most of the income should go back to the filmmakers.
Right.
So it's a way to, you know, prolong a life of a short film, for example, whom, you know, maybe it's difficult to, you know, sell that in a market, so it can give longer lives to our films. So it's really interesting, and it's growing the audience in, especially now in the Nordic countries. So yeah, it's
That's
exciting.
Great.
Yeah.
No, thank you. And we'll definitely come back to this idea about the kind of problem with the platforms model for us. But I think it's very interesting, this idea of thinking, starting from that perspective of who am I telling a story to in terms of an audience. That's a really, that's a nice bridge actually also, I think, to Lene, because I think you had a very particular example in your kind of case study that you presented that was really fascinating. So with your last kind of feature documentary, False Belief, which is an amazing film, and we haven't got time to unpack it, unfortunately, but you gave this very, very interesting example of effectively taking it on a tour. And I guess that kind of points to a very different relationship to an audience. We tend to, you know, the cliche image of distribution is like, in the old terms, like the film goes in the can and goes out into the world on its own. You were experimenting with something very different. Can you just say something about that, about the relationship to an audience that you either anticipated or discovered in that process of touring that film?
I think that I don't know if I really discovered a new audience, but what it was more about was that I felt that there was no chance for the film to reach an audience or its audience. Even though it would be screened at some festivals and some art institutions, I felt this lack of kind of a place to present it, or a way to present it was what is it, almost like a little, yeah, it was frustrating. But then it was also that everyone told me that it's impossible to distribute a film like this. It's impossible. No one will take it on. There's no one will go. And there's also in Norwegian, there's this expression that they can fan. I wanted to say yes, it's possible, and of course, in a sense, it wasn't. Not in the big global sense, or like a Disney, but it was also that I thought, a little bit like you said in the beginning, everyone is very used to complaining about all the systems that are in place. So I thought, let's try to just do it, and without knowing whether it could work or how it could work, and see what grows out of it. Of course, I had, as I say also in the video, I had some things to start with. And I think what I think it confirmed the fact that the audience, as you said, is basically a code word in film industry for market, whereas an audience is like a very multifaceted thing. It's not one thing, and the main, let's say, when I grew up, there was a very strong sense of one public discussion. I think that is no longer the case. How do we kind of engage different audiences, a kind of diverse audience? But then I think that, as I heard also Anne Lajla speak, that in my case there is no no community in that sense, except for maybe the art community. So I can't say, on kind of my community, I speak to them, and then there is these others around. It's at least much more complicated,
yeah,
to define what is the audience, who are they.
Absolutely, but I guess
I just want to add something, one more thing to what Mariken said. I think that this, that industry versus art, in a sense, film industry versus film art, or film as art, it's always, it's part of film history, it's part of this expression, but I think that it's very unconsciously treated in discussions about movies. We don't really have a language. I think you were into that in the comments earlier, that we don't really have, how do we define an audience that is not only about selling tickets to, or like a ticket buying entity somehow.
No, exactly. And I think again, we'll come back to this maybe, but I thought one of the things that's interesting about your model, Lene, as a way of thinking at least, was that you were talking about, touring works in progress. So it's not simply that there's a product that's finished and the audience is just not, it's an audience that's maybe engaged in a continuing conversation, like with Mariken, with the lady who comes back several times. And I think that's a kind of very interesting idea. Again, I'm going to move a bit quickly just to make sure we get everyone kind of involved early on. And I want to switch to Nicolas, actually. I think your contribution, your video contribution, again, fascinating and very, very different, very much more in a kind of essay mode, actually. There's a lot we can unpack with it, but I wanted to sort of touch on one particular aspect, which is, it's kind of clear in the video that you're pointing in a way to the kind of trying to rediscover some of the early, via this amazing David Bowie clip, this kind of more utopian early sense of the internet. And I know you're very interested in this idea of like peer-to-peer distribution, which is a very, very different kind of concept, certainly from the kind of platform model that we've become very accustomed to. Could you say a little bit about that, about your sense of what is peer-to-peer distribution, and why, and what does that mean in terms of thinking about an audience? Oh, you're muted, Nicolas, sorry.
Technically, do you hear me? Technically, yeah. I borrowed the term from like this internet technology that you can share files, basically. While you download, you upload. And of course, I mean, it's an old technology in terms of you share, you have something. You bought like a record or a cassette or something, and you share it with someone. So you give on the information, which in a way is like a very small moment of building an audience, no? Or changing the perspective. Your own property or your own possession gets shared with someone. That's also the tiniest entity of like distribution at the same time. So I see like an intrinsic link between what you called alternative filmmaking, or one could take an older term like avant-garde filmmaking, and the history of how to lack an audience, how to build an audience, how to suffer from the mainstream conception of an audience, and the structures, the delivery systems, which makes the connection from your production to the audience. So I think it's a very deeply rooted intrinsic problem, which is not just like now we have a problem now and we have to solve it. I think it goes back the whole way from, like modern art production from the beginning. Yeah. And I think through why I was so fascinated the way David Bowie puts this in this little TV interview he gave 1999, while a lot of people still thought, yeah, the internet is just some delivery system. you know, it's a new delivery system. It's a powerful one, but it's basically a delivery system. And he says like, no, it's like an alien force. It will change everything. It will change the complete equation of what a medium is, how our audience function, because in a way the audience became a producer, you know, where it comes to. So they can actively participate in the very structure. So I'm very interested in this inner intrinsic relation and what it makes with the art, with the audience, with the distribution. Also in this constant crisis mode it always had. But what Lene said, that's the last sentence I want to say. What Lene said is, for me, like this tryout to go on a little journey is a form of peer-to-peer, but it's a very old-fashioned one. So you go physically from one space to the other and try to discover an audience, or, you know, like to break through this idea. No, there is no audience. It will not work. You just make it. But that's the analog way to do it. And I'm interested in, is it possible now with this crazy alien machine internet, which made distribution super easy? Everybody can upload anything, you know, all the time. You can upload what you want, but you still don't have an audience in this sense. So it's like a very tricky situation of this kind of overflow of, I think on YouTube, as I read this, there's like 6 billion uploads or something. You know, so I want to find something. Is it possible to unite as artists, for example, or also as people interested in the structural work, distribution, and everything, to build structures which are using both this more analog, old-fashioned way to have a very intimate relation to your audience, or this kind of very anonymous spreading, and in between the already existing industries, you know, something like this.
No, but that's helpful. And I think what's interesting about that is that does point back to this question of, again, like you say, that there's an assumption, a default assumption that distribution simply means availability, like in a kind of neutral technological sense. Like you say, I've uploaded it, it's distributed. But what's clear when you start to talk about peer-to-peer technologies, we actually do get close to Lene's position that distribution is a social form. It's about conversations, and the idea of distribution as something where the audience participates is actually really helpful, I think, rather than they just receive. Yeah. Lene, you wanted to jump in?
I just wanted to add that I think I want to also thank Nicolas for the David Bowie to remind me about this interview, because it's so interesting to hear this, how you looked at the internet, or how he described the internet in 1999. Because I think maybe we are now in a situation where there are possibilities. He said, I think it was the same interview when he said that, you know, music will be everywhere in the air, or something like that. I remember I heard that and I thought, it's not, how is that supposed to happen? And now that has happened. And I think, you know, I think it's interesting to think that there are things out there now that we just don't understand that it's already there. And I think Nicolas is onto that in the peer-to-peer. And also I think Knut and Louisa in their conversation about the record store and the sound system.
Yeah.
We are looking for these kind of interfaces where ideas are exchanged, but not because it's duty, or not because it's high culture, not because, you know, per se, but because there's a common interest, I think, in this content or in this kind of exchange.
Absolutely. And I think, again, we wouldn't go into this in detail maybe, but I think you point to that conversation that Knut Årstam had with Louisa Lane as one of these videos. They're not joining us, but they made this crucial point about enthusiasm in a way, as itself in a way a form of distribution. I think it actually connects also to something. There's a kind of famous essay from about 15 years ago by the artist Hito Steyl called In Defense of the Poor Image. I think that very much connects to the idea about thinking about distribution as precisely a kind of collective community effort, and kind of, anyway, but I think there's the history of that discussion in the art world is very different, I think, and it's kind of interesting to connect to that maybe. I want to make sure, I want to bring in Silja though, because Silja, you're speaking again from a very different perspective, because you're in a sense a venue. So like we've been talking about audience, we've been talking about, you know, Lene, for example, traveling between venues, but speaking as someone who's running a venue, a relatively young venue, I definitely get the sense that Kunstnernes Hus opened the cinema space in the venue with a question about and the idea of like multiple audiences. So not, for example, with any default assumption that Oslo needs an art house cinema and there's a pre-existing audience for that, but actually with this idea of a more active questioning of what their audience would be. Could you say a little bit more about that, about Kunstnernes Hus Cinema's audience and how you've been working with that?
Yes. Well, Kunstnernes Hus, of course, is an artist-owned organization with a long history and an established audience already. And placing cinema in an art institution is, in a broad sense, actually kind of stating that film is an art form. And then the idea, of course, bringing the already established audience into the cinema and insisting on exploring different forms of art film is an important part of this project, but also trying to mix an art audience with a film audience. To me, also this generational meetings, one of the most inspiring things I do is having these conversations with filmmakers that were actually active in the 60s and the 70s, bringing them in conversations with younger filmmakers, and also through the program, because I believe in building audiences through content is also a corporate word, but through the program, bringing artists in. This is also always important at Kunstnernes Hus, placing the artist in the center. And instead of having a journalist or someone else interviewing a filmmaker, you could always invite an artist, because it creates a different type of dialogue and conversation, I believe. And also, so through these programs and also series of conversations with placing different filmmakers together, talking about methods, trying to show how completely different these working methods and creative processes can look also in film, is quite important. And it has been really interesting to see how Kunstnernes Hus is probably one of the few places where you can actually fill the cinema more easily when you screen, artists moving. You screen a film made by a visual artist, an experimental work. It's actually quite sometimes easier to fill the space than when you screen a new, a feature film from the international festival circuit. But this mixing of different audiences, different art fields that are traditionally quite isolated in Norway is important to me. But then I'm quite interested in this lack of language. We were touching upon it because, as we all know, film is art and an art form, and it's also a big industry. I feel like the language is also now the language that comes from funders is quite on the premises of the commercial industry, which I find quite unsettling, and I've been thinking about lately in preparing this. I mean, we're talking about the audience as one thing. The Norwegian Film Institute just quite recently actually presented their strategy towards 2025, where they are, one of their statements, this is has been spread around in the shape of a PowerPoint presentations with quite, to me, a very corporate language, where film, they don't actually talk about film, they talk about stories. And it's also about kind of running after trends in a way. I'm not saying that they can ignore that, more and more people are watching films online. The cinema is, young people aren't actually going to the cinema between 2000 and 2018. The younger audience is decreased by 50%. they have to, respond to this somehow. But I just react to the language and to this lack of kind of knowledge about their authority to shape trends, not only to run after trends in a way. They're stating. Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's great, because I think that's actually where I wanted to go also, and I think it would be great. Maybe we could just open this out actually, because I think this idea of having kind of situated these quite different perspectives on audience, I think this idea of language as in a way being the way in which our productions are framed, the way in which they meet an audience, and that as being both a possibility, but also, like you say, an obstacle to. I wonder if anyone else. For example, Lene, I was thinking that in your video, you talked about the problem. You experimented with different ways of promoting the film, and you felt that the conventional method of working with a kind of press company and so on didn't work, and that it needed a different language actually around the film in order to. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that what Silja is saying, I think is very. It's probably a kind of zeitgeist thing, that the corporate language is like everywhere, and I think that the only way we can encounter or do, you can criticize it, but I think that really we need to just pump out other terminology and other words for it. And I think it's difficult with what, like, false belief. What is it? Is it art? Is it film? People want to know, is it documentary? Is it, the genre thing. I'm coming on to the PR thing, because when you are trying to reach, to get information and make it accessible, the easy way is to use the language that's already there, and then it would be very much simplifying audience, for instance. For me, it's like it's very difficult to say what kind of audience. How do you describe your audience? In what kind of words do you describe the audience? And the market language is, its age, its profession. It's, of course, these are all sociological terms, but still, it's not necessarily precise. Silja is waving a lot, so maybe you should say something. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say that I think there are this language that we don't have a Norwegian Film Institute represented, so this is not going to be about, or let's not complain too much about their strategies, but I just wanted to add that I think there are this language represented in this strategy is also creating misunderstandings. I know there are actually quite a lot of interesting things good things going on at NFI at the moment. For example, they are putting more money into development, for example, which I think creates possibilities. And they aren't talking internally, I think, about an audience as one thing, but they want producers, filmmakers also, but mainly producers and distributors to have to be particular about who they want to reach. So I don't think they take an audience as granted as one undefined big thing. But I think it's more concerning that they write actually that the Norwegian Film Institute, this is one of the main ambitions, shall possess and convey deep audience insights as one of the biggest kind of ambitions. I think being the stately run a film institute, it's the only one we have, and it's actually called the Film Institute. They should possess and convey an inspiring language around the importance of film culture. Why is it important, and can they please find an convincing and inspiring even language for it?
I just want, because I'm seeing some hands up as well, and I think that would be a great. I think there's others would like to respond. I think Nicolas had his hand up earlier as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that like one aspect of this, what I talked about, this intrinsic relation, is also related to the traditional institutional frameworks. Let's say, of course, film, like cinema film, is an art form, but it was always separated from the visual arts on the level of how it's institutionally distributed, like the cinema, with a very specific feel to it and logic. And now when you like this proliferation, a lot of these avant-garde logics like completely went from cinema into the art world. No? Like there you have all this experimental stuff in the art world and not so much necessarily in cinema there also, but there's like a totally different map now. And I felt like, for example, the festival which invited me to participate here, like AMIF, I had some really interesting experience there I didn't have before, because as a form, like this art, like it tries to bring these two worlds together. Like you have this more like installations or young art students, film students showing the stuff. And then suddenly in the night you have like what I saw, like Persona from Bergman. And the way I thought, like, should I see Bergman now? I've seen the film a lot before. So I went there and I was blown away, because it was in this different context. Before there was a discussion of, you know, like artists, movies from artists, just learning how to make films. And then you see this like big masterpiece, avant-garde masterpiece in a new copy in the cinema. And it had a totally different effect on me. I connected it with other aspects of art making in a way, like filmmaking, which are usually so separate. So I think this is also one direction, this piercing through this very strong boundaries of this institutional, how a film festival work in comparison to a gallery opening or whatever, you know, like this. And I think there's also a lot to experiment with on this level.
I'm seeing a lot of hands. I want to, Mariken, I think, and Lene, we're going to respond also.
Yes, I also think that this language, I feel that, for example, you have Nordland Art and Film School. That is a school where you educate both artists and filmmakers, and they don't separate into different categories. So a lot of this language is there in the educations, and also, I mean, in film art academies, a lot of people are making films. And so it's kind of not just, as Lene is saying, I think, to continue using that language and refusing to simplify too much, and also to that, because I think especially for filmmakers, it's like we have a system that is not working at all for financing films. Like for a new company, it's impossible to get funding, and then you just use your time to apply again and again and again and again until you maybe stop making films. A lot of people do that. So to have time to understand all the economy stuff and engage and write chronics and everything, that it's like a lot of people don't have time to do it. But if we instead channel our energy into, I feel that everything is actually there. Like the cinemas are there, the people who want the content is there, but it's just the filmmakers are spending the time on the wrong things. And you get maybe like flattered because someone picked you for a talent workshop and you spend 1 year doing that and you haven't made anything that has reached an audience. So it's kind of, we have to talk openly about how are we spending our time. And of course, the developing money has to be a lot more, and then continue to use the language. Yeah,
no, but this is great. I mean, I guess it's difficult to keep the focus narrowly on distribution, because it naturally leads into questions about production, I think. But I do want to try and keep a little bit of a focus on that aspect, because we could definitely have a parallel conversation about the kind of production paradigm. I saw both Lene and Anne Lajla had their hands up actually, so I don't know who wants to go first. Anne Lajla, do you want to jump in?
Anne Lajla, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting what you are all saying here, and I just wanted to comment on the distribution of, or as we have experienced, the insight for the audience, which has been really interesting. We are doing a collaboration with NRK Drama, and we are developing the first ever Sámi drama series with them. And it's been interesting to work so closely with NRK, who is a broadcaster, and their focus on the insight. You have to know your audience, and how important that has been from the very beginning of when you start developing your script and you know, making your story. And I think this is, and like Silja is referring to the NFI's new strategy, that you should know your audience. So yeah, so this is an interesting difference. And of course, all the big distribution platforms like Netflix, HBO, and all the international giants, they are challenging the Norwegian film, both challenging and also creating new opportunities when it comes to both the production opportunities and then, of course, the worldwide distribution, and which is like something from a national perspective. You have to have that in you have to think about that when you are creating your films and your content, that it has to be something that people are choosing to watch. Yeah, so.
Thanks. Lene, do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to just also about the PR agent, the question that you asked, actually, I think is very interesting in terms of how, and it's also to do with Nicolas' idea about the peer-to-peer. I think that one of the things that became very clear to me, at least as an idea, very viable, is that audiences need to be built, and it's a long-term thing. And it takes more than just like like I say, a product, of course, and someone who wants to watch it. It's a lot. It's a structure around it, and it's people who talk about it, write about it, discuss it. Is also, so I think to think about these things in as a context, like Nicolas also mentions, I think it's important. But I also think that it's interesting. When I started to study film in the early 90s, one of the things that we were very discussing a lot was that the difference between television and cinema. And cinema was much higher status and was considered very complex as language-wise, whereas television was very banal, technically not at all as advanced as the cinema. Also in terms of audiences, of course, that the focus of the audience would not be as concentrated in front of the television as it was in the cinema. And now it feels like these the same kind of opposition, you might possibly say, between I don't know, a phone or something that you're watching it on and the cinema, because the cinema, the focus, the kind of focus you get in the cinema is still unique, I think. Just, yeah.
Mariken.
I just want to say, because I, as you said, I talk about, like you talk about distribution and then I talk about production at once. And I just want to say that I feel that those two things are so extremely connected. And that's also why distribution is so extremely important, because so many artists and filmmakers are like, oh, I mean, to take the step and do something, you have to have a feeling that there's someone's here to watch it. And in that case, I also think it's I mean, the fact that we have Kunstnernes Hus Cinema now, and we have Vega Scene, and we have Cinematek also, who are, I mean, those things are so important, and that should also other people who have venues know that. I mean, maybe the film world could take some, like in art world, it's normal that the gallery says, hey, Lene Berg, do you want to come here and show something? Maybe cinemas can do that too. Like you have a local filmmaker who comes from a little place, then the cinema can contact the filmmaker and say, come on, do you want to have a screening here in a year? That would be really interesting development, I think, because the cinemas also, they're really scared because of the big companies are releasing things online and everything at the same time. So if they were smart now, I think they would reach out to artists directly and
No, but that's important, and I actually think that takes us. Silja, I see you've got your hand up, and but I think we should in a second, just with time. I think we really need to talk about a bit more concretely, maybe about what the finances of distribution actually, in these different models as an independent or alternative filmmaker for making your practice sustainable, right? So thinking precisely about the next production as a product of the distribution of the current one. But Silja, do you want to, before we open up, do you want to, because you wanted to respond to what's just been said, I think?
Yeah, just following up on Mariken, I guess. No, I just really see this, or a necessity to have a clearer kind of idea of an alternative repertoire of films through maybe not, I've been talking to several people in this panel about a need for an alternative kind of network of distribution for artist-independent films. Maybe it's not about one formal network, but about kind of creating awareness through formal, informal collaborations on these types of films that aren't going to have a traditional theatrical distribution or distributed on Netflix. I feel like this is also connected to this lack of language. If we develop this language, this is also about developing consciousness of repertoire. I know that, for example, the film clubs is now presented a package of independent Norwegian independent films. These types of packages of alternative collections of films is something we can collaborate on, I feel. And I also just want to add very quickly that I see a lot of potential in collaborations between these low-scale cinemas, niche cinemas, and art institutions with screening possibilities. Maybe also new types of streaming channels for artists and independent films. Because we maybe something that connects us is that it's about image and sound. It's not about stories. I don't know. These types of discussions interest me, at least.
No, this is helpful, and I think what you're starting to touch on, Silja, is like I think maybe we should try and be a bit specific, right? About what the possibilities are, right? So like 15 years ago, the discussion was about the long tail, right? About this idea that distribution in general, in terms of platforms and Amazon and so on, was going to be this great utopia, because someone like Amazon could make as much money selling thousands of, like a few copies of 1,000 small titles as they did from selling 1 million of one big one. And that's worked great for them, but it actually has not, as we can tell, worked great for the individual. It's a good model for, the long tail is a good model for platforms. It's bad for the independents. There's this centripetal force. The winners gain bigger slices of the pie, basically. What I'm curious about is, like, Silja, you pointed to, so we've been talking, for example, about these very, very specific initiatives, like literally like Lene, like individual one-to-one conversations, a cinema, a filmmaker going to run those venues. What I would like to kind of, that to me seems to point to almost like looking to the music world for a model, right? Because that's what's happened to music. Like that you, as the sales of, the distributed sales go down, basically the distribution becomes a promotional mechanism to make the real money from going on tour. And you mentioned in your video, Lene, that actually that ends up being the case in what you did, right? That you made more money from speaking fees than you did from sales. That's one very particular model. But firstly, maybe we could start with you, but then we could maybe open it out to think about, for example, where is the action in terms of online, if it's not the Netflix model, which is being foisted on us by funders? What are the other specific, what have you experimented with individually in terms of models? But maybe, Lene, maybe we can start with you, just about that idea of the kind of artist on tour model of generating money through speaking fees. Has that got a future, or is that kind of an aberration?
I think it needs to be explored further. I think it also depends on the film and the artist, of course. But I think that also through Jack, if we come into the reason to start it was to be able to maybe explore it more systematically, not just with one project. So that False Belief, my tour, would be a kind of a pilot for that. But I think there is a possibility for income, but I do not think, at least in Norway right now, that income will not be at all in kind of the size of, funding or contribute seriously to funding of a feature film. Let's say it's not in that size. But if you look at film funding in Norway, in all of Scandinavia or Nordic countries, the film funding, we have a kind of a fake market. We are playing as if it was a market. So everything is in a sense subsidized and whatever. So in that sense, I think that if we, let's say, politically can prove that we reach audiences and we build income through this network to a more or less official network, I think we could also channel the funding to support it. Do you understand what I say? Like film politically, you could say that the audience is also coming through these channels. So why should it only be tickets sold in a traditional cinema that gets this extra support? This may be a little bit detailed for people who are not in Norway, but this is a big discussion in Norway whether you should support, get extra funding for each ticket sold, basically. Right. So that's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
No, but I think it's very helpful, and like you say, that's not. I don't think that's restricted to Norway. Any idea, the kind of the old model that in a way comes from theatre of like that you measure the metric for funders is bums on seats, right? That it's like that it's and it's about ticket sales. Whereas of course, as soon as you move to the art world, tens of thousands of people might see a work in a show, but it's not the metric's not quite the same. But I wonder
and I think that this meeting, just to little short, the meeting right now, because film or moving image is kind of a meeting point between two very different logics in terms of audience, the art world, let's say, and the cinema. And this meeting can be productive, I think, even though it's totally complicated, both in terms of funding and distribution.
And language.
And language. Yeah, very much. I wonder if it's worth, I don't know, if you all actually, Mariken, maybe want to say more about Jack and about some of the ideas you have so far. So Jack, we should say, or Jack is a very young, like weeks old initiative, like a collaboration between the two of you and several other filmmakers and people from distribution. But could you talk about maybe like a specific strategy that you've been discussing around distribution, about trying to kind of get through some of these blind spots that we've been discussing?
Yes, we started this filmbyrå Jack in January, and then I think, as Lene also said, that instead of one by one artists doing this kind of projects and tours and getting a lot of information and contact, and then you are out doing the next film and being away from it for 2 years and then doing it again, it's not a smart use of energy. So instead we want to gather artists and share all the knowledge, and also to try to really get to know like the whole Norway venue scene, and know so that you can be more precise when you are going on a tour. So okay, but in that city you have that person, and I think that's really a big key. So it's not just filmmakers starting something, but also having this building this contact from day one with the screening venues. Because if there is a person who has really cares about getting this kind of content out, and maybe knows his or her local audience and know how to describe a work so that the audience will feel welcome, that's extremely good to know. And the feeling now is that everything is just one big thing and it's very hard. But when you get the more details up, I think it's going to be much easier to navigate. And also that you can go on a tour with many filmmakers and many films at once, and also for artists to share their process with each other, and to have it in the funding process. So when you apply for money for a new film, you can say that Filmbyrån Jack is a part of this and will be.
Yeah, so that's interesting because it sounds in a way what it's pointing towards is the idea of like forms of kind of cooperative models, which are not about, for example, filmmakers getting together and making a work together, but about sharing resources, sharing a network, sharing a bit like August Orts, for example, in Brussels, maybe, for example.
And we have Cato Fossum is also a part of it, so he's not a filmmaker himself. Yeah. So yeah, that's also very good.
I want to kind of just kind of bring other people in, so because Anne Lajla, you mentioned right at the beginning in a way that this financial model that the Film Institute works with, and the importance of finding ways to channel money back to filmmakers. You mentioned, you know, the festival circuit, the International Short Film Festival circuit is still a big platform for new short films, but as we know, they tend not to pay, and they don't pay fees or very, very small fees. So what is the kind of hope for you in terms of what do you see as the future for the Film Institute in terms of bringing money back to Sámi filmmakers working with the short form?
Yeah, so I just wanted to continue on what Mariken said about the collaborative, and for us, the idea for Sámi Film, the streaming platform, started with a short film series we did in 2014. We had 7 filmmakers who did a series of short films, and after they did this amazing distribution together, and they had one person, you know, doing all the bookings, and they screened the films in 150 places all around the world internationally, and actually earned some money from that work. And so that's where the idea to Sámi Film came, that let's at least have our own platform, so we can, you know, reach our own audience, the Sámi people, and our, you know, audiences, but also outside. And since Sámi Film Institute, we are a governmentally funded institution, so we take the cost of running the Sámi Film, the streaming platform, and then most of the income should go back to the filmmakers. So I had this one filmmaker calling me some time ago, and she was so surprised, and she said, "Oh my God, I got suddenly you know, thousands of kroners from my short film which I made in 2015. It's incredible." So it's yeah, so and now we are working to open it up for Greenland. We have a good collaboration with Greenlandic filmmakers, and then also Canada. Maybe
and just to understand that would mean kind of like IP blocking. So we're talking about like online streaming. And, yes. And streaming like with kind of nation specific or IP specific.
Yeah. So we don't have geo blocks for those areas. It's complicated with all the music rights and all of that, and it's some work to get there. But that's our hope and our dream, that we can open up Sámi Film to other countries, other areas, Europe and United States and Canada, and have this global. Both Sámi but also other indigenous film catalog, which is quite unique. You don't find it anywhere else. So, and we know that there is an audience, because we see it a big change now on the international film scene, where diversity is like the hottest topic of every big festival. I'm going to Cannes Film Festival to talk about Sámi films, and so it's really our time now to look for other audiences, and they are there, and I think it's possible.
Yeah. Maybe just because I think it's a really interesting contrast, actually, maybe I could just turn to Nicolas for a second, because just from your video also, I have the sense that you're in a way, if Anne Lajla's been in a way talking about this kind of institutional, you know, small institution, but the kind of that form of distribution, that your video is pointing in a way to this other kind of, I think you kind of called it hyper distribution at some point, but this kind of meme culture, the way in which things circulate way beyond any context that their makers might ever have imagined. Can you just talk about your relationship to that, or your relationship to these questions as an artist, again, because working in quite a different way, I sense, from someone like Lene also.
I mean, I also work like she did, but that's a film project in a way from what I'm working on since a long time, to only throw myself into this ocean of distribution, which is already there. But also it's like more and more in this position of like, you know, like during this whole Trump time, for example. I think there's no film needed about Trump in the future anymore because it already exists. It was already made in real time. You know, the most interesting, most suspense, the series was already made. You know, like, and I think these aspects are. Some artists are already working with this, of course, since a long time. I mean, found footage is not a new idea, but there's a different quality to it. And I think, I mean, so this is like a classical, the film is like made out of materials very quickly. I already work on, like I made a whole section about this idea, which starts with Bowie and then I go in all kinds of directions. So I just made a short. But in order to insist on this intrinsic relation between also production, distribution, and audience, and I wanted to add like quickly one little thing, maybe one aspect of this very practical thing, like, and the most practical is money in a way, always, as a production. Because I think in a way the internet stands for that the distinction between production, distribution, and reproduction collapsed in a very strange way. I remember in the 90s, distribution was a real problem. There was no distribution channel for artists besides you have your gallery or, you know, like these very traditional forms. Now distribution is like super easy, but in a way it's too easy. It's too big. It's too anonymous, too gigantic in order to use it practically. And I'm interested in working what Helene also already brought up in this very like her personal approach is, and which is has a long tradition, this kind of trying this out. You know, when Godard made their political films, Sigaverto films, nobody wanted to show them. They got money from the TV and said, we cannot show this shit. And then they went to the US and showed it themselves and started to talk with the Black Panthers and the students and made a tour and earned money from the fees. Actually, they did exactly the same thing. They went for half a year on a big tour in the US. So this is a very old thing that when your production gets stuck and it doesn't fit into the existing frameworks. So I'm interested in can we share this collapse and use the internet, for example. I'm interested also in this question of flat rate. Instead of paying the money to Netflix or to other platforms, every artist who wants to be part of this, every institution pays a certain kind of fee, whatever, €5 a month or something. And then you have this construction where you can share. So I have this film and I would like to distribute it, whatever, in Canada or something. And then you share these networks, what you said, with the other people who are participating in this. And then you become, like you start to proliferate this kind of very personal effort. You go from one place to the other and try to sell your stuff in a way. And I wonder, I think that has a lot of problems, very complicated. But I think this could be a direction to go to create your own wealth, so to speak, in order to, everybody gets their money from, if you do something for this network, you get some fee, whatever, you get paid to distribute this film in this region, or then 5 people in different world regions distributing this film through their network, one in a small cinema, the other in a self-organized art space, whatever, you know, like this. So I wonder if it's possible to go in this direction in a more organized way, which is a lot of work and very difficult, but that's where I think. You know.
Yeah, like a return almost to the kind of tradition of the film co-ops, the artist film co-ops.
Yeah, something like this.
Yeah. I've seen some hands up. I know people want to respond, and maybe we can, here's a couple of responses, and then maybe we should think about opening. I know there's a couple of questions already actually, so, but I saw a couple of hands up. I don't know who wants to go first. Silja, did you want to say something or?
Yeah, I just, I think lengthening the life of these types of films is interesting to me, to think about how we can do that instead of competing with each other on different platforms. And in that, because I am also interested in streaming in a sense, and Kunstnernes Hus Cinema actually got some funding to establish a streaming service for then different types of films, and then are than the ones that are available, and it would be more focused on artist film and independent film. But I already, see a lot of problems concerning. You don't want to make it difficult for the film's journey out into the world. The film world is very focused on premieres, the product way of thinking about it in a way. So, but still, if we talk more about the differences in the different, as Lene was mentioning, the different types of aesthetic experiences, different types of viewing, the gallery and installation, the very absorbed cinema experience, and the private streaming experience. How can we work with lengthening the lifespan of a work, basically, through collaborating instead of competing on the different screening formats? I think is an interesting question. Yeah.
Mariken, I can see you want to respond.
Yeah, I also I just thought about AMIF also, because I was there this fall for the first time, and then because of Corona it was a smaller program, so everyone saw the same things and you didn't have any choice. So it wasn't like, oh, am I gonna see this film or this film or this film? And that was such a fantastic experience, that you are this group of 30-40 people, and you see a lot of work, and then everyone is seeing the same things, and the conversations get deeper and deeper, and you can all compare, or you can all talk about the work in relation to the other work you've seen together. And that, I mean, with how many options you have on, and how to decide what you are going to see online, I feel that those kind of things can be very valuable, that you make a choice to go to a festival, and then it's just one thing at a time. And I come and say, I like to slow people down, like people want to be slowed down, I think, and to yeah, I believe in that. And also that I just listened to this podcast with this crypto art thing, where you can sell like one thing and it goes for this insane price. I don't know about it, but that also seems like that what artists really have, like we make a new piece of art and we want to talk it to, we want to have a conversation about it. It's like, I think that's what the audience also want to have, like that's what they also long for. So we have it, and yeah.
Maybe this is a good moment, because actually that's I think it's interesting how much our conversations have come back to this kind of being together desire, which obviously there's a lot of reasons we have that at the moment, but I think also just this sense of being acutely aware of what festivals provide. And actually we have a question in the chat about festivals. So just, I'm going to read this, and just while you're listening, if you're watching and you do have other questions for the panel, please you can put them in the chat, because I think we still have maybe a couple more minutes. So Frank Herman asks, film festivals play an important role in empowering distribution. Not in content, but in format. Many film festivals are very similar. How would you break into a film festival, I guess a film festival format, and make the festival break out of its own limited construction? So what would be a way what would your ideal model for kind of a new way of thinking about a film festival be in terms of empowering distribution? So then I guess maybe rather than being an end point for distribution, like being a platform for further distribution, I guess, I think is interesting. Does anyone have any thoughts or any experience of festivals that you think are really doing that in an interesting way? Silja.
This is not my idea. I just got it from a colleague who's planning to make a new festival here in Oslo, actually already this autumn, I think. Kind of a documentary, but also hybrid formats focus. he said the idea was to create a prize, and instead of money, you actually get extended distribution, which I thought was an interesting idea.
As a prize.
As a prize, you get help to spread the film even more, or which I think is interesting. That's not experimenting with the format for the audience, though, but it helps lengthening the lifespan of a film and can create new opportunity.
Absolutely. And I guess Nicolas's idea also kind of relates to this in a way, I think, as well. But did anyone else want to jump in about this idea about the role of the festivals?
I think Mariken said something very good just before you read the question about the size of but that is more about the audience in the festival. I think this focused crowd watching the same things over a certain period of time is a very interesting idea. But I think in terms of distribution, I think that has also changed a lot. I don't know enough about it, but I think that the traditional festivals were really a kind of springboard for further distribution, and now it's become almost like a closed circuit, or to a certain degree at least. I don't know what exactly what the reason is for that. If it's just because the cinemas don't want anything that's not, blockbusters, or what happened. I don't know exactly.
But yeah, and it's also an interesting time now, thinking about the COVID and all the, all the festivals have gone digital and online, and all the like new possibilities. For example, there is this one indigenous festival in Canada who went online in October, and they have decided to do it again this year because of course because of the uncertainty of the situation, but also they reached like a world audience by going online, which is really interesting. So it will be exciting to see what comes after we are done with this terrible COVID situation, and how this will change the traditional festivals and the digital hybrid solutions. So yeah.
I was going to. I think there's another question from Frank actually, but do you want to say something first?
Experimentation with the duration, I think, is interesting, and maybe hopefully more festivals can go into that, which also keeping the audience for several hours in a space watching something together that lasts for a very long time, I think creates a completely different experience and also kind of strengthens the makes it kind of clearer what the cinema space, how it differs from other types of screenings now in the days where cinemas are threatened. I must add this.
I just one thing to add to that. As I thought about, I was in the jury of the Norwegian Short Film Festivals, in Grimstad a couple of years ago, and I realized that they made more and more categories. So I was in the jury of short documentary, and I question this development. Do we need more and more categories, or should we have more and more film? Question.
Interesting. Maybe that touches. I think maybe I can just read one more. Frank Herman, who asked the first question, actually has a suggestion for Silja about the Creative Europe program having opportunities for networks in the future, actually. But he also asks, can one reflect on the power of the accepted film formats that define the chances of distribution? Does one have to define better the different types of formats to manage the potential expectations of audiences? I wonder if that relates a little bit to what you were saying, Lene, but I don't know if other people have a response to that.
Feels like it, I don't understand the question exactly, but it feels like it touches on the same.
Yeah, I guess this in terms of expectation of audience, maybe this question, maybe the format in terms of, like you say, defining things by simply being short or by being documentary, maybe these over rigid classifications, maybe that is, to go back to this question about language, and kind of creating expectations. Maybe that is.
Can I just add that
Please.
I feel like if art was a more integrated part of society, to speak in broad terms, I feel that the knowledge of how artists working with film, knowledge of their processes are quite low for the larger audience. So if they had kind of strengthened awareness of this, if this knowledge was, introduced in school, not only reading, but also looking at things, films are all around us, but we don't really have the vocabulary, then you didn't need to focus so much on the different genres and telling people again and again that film can also be an art form, and it can also be very experimental. It could also introduce new ideas and new ways of looking.
Nicolas, you were going to respond to that also.
I mean, I just wanted to add that what I try to also show a bit in the film essay there is like this. All this is already also happening, of course, like on an incredible scale. Like, think about your availability. Think about your knowledge about music nowadays compared to 30 years, or film. I mean, some films you just get now the stuff like this. It's super easy to get very rare stuff. The accessibility to material is completely different than it used to be pre-internet. And I think that also changes a lot, like how audience are created. They are not anymore homogeneous like they used to be, because the institution is like spread in all kinds of layers. It's like a completely different, and nobody really knows what is out there. Also, it's not just an archive or a library. A library has a librarian who knows like where the books are, and there's an order. This is like a wild growing thing within commercial networks. And we are all producers, but we don't get paid. Everybody who's using Facebook is in a way works for this company and creates the value, but and hardly gets revenue and stuff like this. So I'm thinking about this. I think it's super important to insist on that one has to break open from an artistic perspective these kind of boundaries. And I mean, I thought it's a really interesting example. I was really surprised how good it like started to run in a way to start to create a new atmosphere of how film and art films and cinema is like interacting, and the audience is like also creating like a new. It's a very small audience. Maybe that's good that it's so remote.
The festival in Harstad.
Yeah, that you can experiment on this small scale. That you don't have to always like fulfill these expectations of this buzz of the newest film, the biggest audience, and then you see like in the details suddenly things are shifting in terms of how people really communicate about art, which is often very poor. I mean, look at the gallery, for example. Nobody talks about the art. They just talk about something else. Or film festivals are basically also machines to generate new production, to make deals in the background. And then so there is a lot of stuff working in the background, which is so traditional and doesn't really fit anymore to what's going on in the world nowadays. I think there's still like a lot of work to do to understand where we are actually. What changed? Like the alien, to understand the alien that David Bowie is describing.
I think on that note, understanding the alien, I think we might, because I'm sort of aware of time that we've gone to 80 minutes. But unless there's last comments, because Mariken, I saw your hand up, you wanted to respond to the alien?
No, I just find that was kind of because I mean, with the climate situation and everything also, so the thought about smaller festivals, like very, very good, but small. I mean, I think that would be really much more interesting than these big market machines, really. And that seems like a nice future in a way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how much of this conversation has come back to this kind of intimacy and continuity of conversation and focus. And I guess one of the many questions we have to leave unanswered is in a way, how is that only possible in these kind of spaces, these social spaces, or are there kind of, for example, online formats that can create that or not? I don't think we can, unfortunately, we're going to have time to unpick that question and the others we left on the table. But I want to say thank you so much to all the panelists. I want to really stress that I think the individual films are also like a really rich resource of a lot of ideas we haven't had time to talk about today. So if you haven't seen those already, you should definitely watch them. Thanks again to On and For Production and our Creative Europe program. I don't know, Silja, is there anything else you would like to add as the co-organizer as a last word?
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Mike for leading this conversation. I'm so happy this happened, and I also have to stress that we need more conversations like this. So this is only a beginning, I hope.
Right. On that note,
thank you very much.
Get out in the sunshine.
Bye.
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 Bye.